removing the phosphor plate, the shadow mask, and all the internal parts, and removing the Altor ring, and then coming up with a mechanism to mount it inside and put an Altor button on the outside for high voltage. And then we fritted the faceplate back onto the funnel. It's this white line here. So, but that's pretty much all the progress we've made today. But that's because we have some other things that we have to do first before we can actually seal the gun into the CRT. So the oven that I had built to do the fritting and processing, I didn't have a pumping station for it. So we had to add the pumping station. I didn't want to try rebuilding the 15G from scratch without having processed another type of CRT to make sure that what I'm doing actually works. So we wanted to do that with the 21AXP22. And then I needed to mount the E-beam rebuilt 15GP22 gun onto a stem. So those first three items we've done, and then the next thing I'll need to do is seal the gun into the 15GP22, process it, fire the getters, and then I want to wait 2 weeks after flashing the getters and check to see if they're staying silver. If they stay silver, then we'll activate the cathodes and test the emission. We don't want to activate them right away because, excuse me, if we do have a leak, then that will ruin the gun. But as long as we don't activate the cathodes, if it leaks up the air, that the guns will be all right and can be reused. Okay, I wanted to correct some bad information I gave in the last talk. I thought the 15G was made of O120 glass. Nick suggested the faceplate was made of a different glass, information he found in the Blue Book. And the faceplate was Corning 9012 glass, the funnel was 1610 glass, and the neck was actually O120 glass. And he was right about that. So I wanted to, but we wanted to be certain because the information was actually for the prototype 15G and not for the production one. So I took pieces of glass and using an electron microscope, you can look at the characteristic X-ray spectra while you're looking at the glass. And doing that, we came up with the, excuse me, the elemental analysis for the 15G glass. And 9010 apparently is pretty close to the 9012. You can see that the percentage components match quite well, so we know it really was 9112. But I didn't know the exact composition of 9012, so we tried to get the information from Corning, and I probably spent over a year trying to get the information. They finally pointed me to a patent for that type of glass, but it really just covers a broad range of glasses and not a specific one. So they did tell me that they thought the funnel glass, I forgot the number for the funnel glass, but they told me they thought that was just an older designation for the 9012 glass. And they appear to be right because the percentages are right. I eventually found out why they were so nervous about telling me the exact composition. When the FBI came to give a visit at our facility, they were giving a talk about export control and how important that was. So what made me nervous is he said he wanted to give an example, and I swear he was looking right at me first, and he said we had an incident at Corning, and it turned out it wasn't about me, but it was about at a trade show, a Chinese visitor was very interested in this flexible foam glass they came up with, asking a lot of questions about it. He started visiting their facility and wanted to learn all the details and the composition of the glass, but they were wanting to protect their trade secrets. So what he really had wanted to do, he thought there was a big market for this, so he wanted to actually start producing it. And, so when he went back to China, he set up he was setting up a company, and he was hiring people from Corning. Well, it turned out he was hiring FBI agents. So there was a sting operation. So fortunately, they didn't happen to me. So one of the modifications I had to make to the oven was to put a pump-out port into it for the CRT. Steve sent me Scotty's diffusion pump and the pump-out fitting, but I was concerned. When I built the oven, I was very concerned about having a uniform temperature inside for the 15G, so I have very thick insulation, which wasn't long enough to support that. So I built an adapter to use. So this tube runs coaxially through here, and basically it forms a water jacket around that tube. And then this is a Ultra-Tor fitting. There's an O-ring in there. You turn it to squeeze the O-ring to make a seal. So then I drilled a hole in the bottom of the oven and fed that through. So this shows the oven. You can see how thick the insulation is. I mounted the diffusion pump off to the side. There's a Bayard Alpert high vacuum gauge here to measure the vacuum in the CRT while we're doing the processing. And then there's a bellows that runs across to that adapter that it showed you. I probably shouldn't have it so close to my gasoline, but and I needed to determine the parameters for the tip-off oven because Hawkeye didn't provide it. Information wasn't provided when we received the equipment, so we had to do some tests. So I built this tube to evacuate and try and find out what the proper parameters were for the tip-off oven. This is the tip-off oven. It basically heats the glass tube so that it melts and collapses and seals. Then Bob didn't like the stand I made for the when I fritted the 15G, so he made this very nice stand to hold it more securely than what I did. But I just added this thing on top to hold that small tube for this test. So I was trying to measure the temperature of the tip-off oven. So I went through a series of voltages measuring the temperature, what I thought would be the appropriate temperature. That didn't work, so we just had to keep increasing the voltage and repeating it until we got one that worked. And this is what a good CO looks like. So it turned out to be 30 volts for 4.5 minutes. But during the process of measuring the temperature versus voltage, ended up burning up the tip-off oven. I wasn't sure if we had any more of them, so I decided to see if I could rebuild it. So I wound a new coil. I forget the type of alloy, but it's like nichrome except it has aluminum mixed in with it. And wound the coil, and it actually came out to the same specifications. The type Scotty has can be rebuilt if we ever run out of them. So then I wanted to rebuild a 21 AXP22 that Bob had. The problem was it had a vacuum leak. And you can't really tell by looking at it where the leak was, but using a helium leak detector, I located it down to this region. I had it setting up on the vertical lathe with the helium leak detector hooked up to it. Turned out there were 2 spots that had leaks. So I took a TIG welder and reflowed the weld on the CRT and then leak tested it again, and at least with the helium leak tester it looked good. Added guidance to a Delta gun that I got from Ingo. And installed it into the 21AXP 22 and put it into my oven. It just barely fits. It was a little tricky maneuvering it in, but then I processed it. So we ramped it up at 1.5 degrees centigrade per minute up to 300 C, and then waited an hour. After an hour, then we sealed off the tip off and then let it cool down. So we let the initial cool rate down at the same rate, 1.5 degrees C per minute. But after it gets down to about 200 C, the oven has such good insulation that the rate gets slower than that. But at least during the processing, the vacuum was around 6.3 times 10 to the minus 5. It'd be better to have a higher vacuum than that, but it actually gets much better once the CRT cools down. The walls, the AquaDog, actually absorb any residual gas in there, and then you have the getter that you fire later. So you still end up with a really good vacuum. The oven has a ramp and hold controller here, and I have it programmed so that it ramps up. Then once it reaches I'm not having a good day. Once it reaches the temperature and is held for an hour, then it lights up a light telling me it's ready to tip off, and then I tip it off manually. So I needed to put the stem onto the 15G gun that was rebuilt because E-beam didn't want to do it for whatever reason. This is a jig that Bob Glanner made for me to hold the pieces. This is actually not the gun that E-beam rebuilt, but this was a gun that Bob sent to play with the jig. So for connecting the heaters, there's like a little basket. I mean, it's hard to see on this view, but the way the getters are connected, not the getters, the heaters, there's a wire, a bad contact in the cap. So the heater wires, the wires from the heaters come down here. They have a ribbon spot welded onto the heater wire, and then there's there's a network of wires that they've spot welded together to connect to the heater wires that they then connect to the stem. And I just didn't think I could do that. And the way the cathodes that E-beam used were built weren't adaptable to this situation either. So the new 15G cathodes were actually made by Tektronix. E-beam bought their remaining stock when they closed, and they have a ceramic base, and the heaters are connected to these ribbons, and they're riveted to the ceramic. So when I bend the ribbons, I don't have to worry about breaking the heaters, which is very nice. But I had to figure out how to make connections to the heaters. So I came up with this model by bending them over and having one set of leads at this level, another set of leads at this level, and then attaching wires coming off to the side. But I couldn't really, using the TIG weld, not the TIG, the spot welder I had, I couldn't really reach in and actually do that weld. So I came up with a different method to do it. This is what the final product looked like after spot welding leads on. And it took me quite a while to figure out how to route all the leads and make sure I got them in the right places. And this is the method I used for the heater connectors. I took a nickel ribbon and basically routed it around in and out to those ribbons coming from the heater connectors. And so this is one end of the heaters and the other ribbons for the other end. So, wow, I'm going through this talk faster than I thought. So the gun position, I needed to figure out how to locate the gun from, so it's the right distance from the shadow mask. Well, Bob has measurements from the top of the CRT down to the end of the grid cup, which turns out to be 600 millimeters. And that works for intact 16G, but the problem is I may not have the internal parts the same distance from the CRT face as in a regular 15G. So I wanted to come up with a different method. And so this scan is from the Blue Book, but I had to figure out what they actually meant by the top of the post and the top of the mount for the gun. So after making a bunch of measurements on a good 15G, it turns out the top of the post was actually the shadow mask position, and the top of the mount was the top of the convergence cup. And then we know the length of the from the top of the convergence cup to the end of the first grid cup, which works out to 4.73 inches. So what I can do, and this sounds terrible, but I'll take a tape measure and shove it up the tube until it touches the shadow mask, and then make a mark on the outside of the glass at this point at 21 inches down. So by making a mark there, I can see the end of the grid cup. What I can't see is the top of the convergence cup, because that's inside of the Aquadog where you can't the Aquadog where you can't see it. So the shadow mask is actually quite rugged. It's a cupro-nickel alloy, and it's under a lot of tension, so there's no danger of damaging it with the tape measure. So one thing I'm worrying about is how to process it. So what I used for the ramp for the 21AXP22, again, was the 1.5 degrees C per minute. Hold it at 300 C, tip it off, and then let it cool down. For the 15GP22, I'm interested in doing it at 410 C. So when I fritted the faceplate on, I had to raise the temperature to 440 C. That causes the frit to devitrify, and then the melting point of the frit actually then goes up much higher than 440 C. So the frit won't melt at 410, and 410 is just above the strain point of the glass used. So by processing it at 405 C, any residual strain in the CRT, in the gun, will be annealed out. And so I feel like it would be safer to handle and more rugged. But trying to find out what they normally use for color CRTs, I haven't had much luck. That Ma and Pa CRT oven that the museum had, the instructions for it said to go up around 300 or 350 C for a color CRT. The information I got from racks through, was that they run it at about 410 C. But I just don't know what the CRT envelope is going to do under vacuum at that temperature, or whether I should do it at 300 just for a longer time. In the RC data book, I looked there to see what they've used. So for the 15G, they said they did a 150-second index, and in all of their charts, position 17 is where they've reached the maximum temperature of 410 degrees C. But so in getting to position 17, then it works out for the 15G that they were doing it at 9.2 degrees C per minute over 42.5 minutes. So for the 21AXP, I did it at 1.5 degrees C over 200 minutes. So I feel like by going slow, what I don't have to worry about is the faceplate cracking. So what I believe is the problem with the faceplate cracking during the process. What RCA did was to put a shield above the faceplate of the CRT to reduce the radiation into it. So that was tried at Hawkeyes, but it ended up with the CRT breaking. What I believe RCA may have done is to make a shield that was basically the shape of this opening in the decorative faceplate. So this glass, if you look at the optical transmission of it, there's a range over which infrared radiation transmits through quite rapidly, and then a range where it's absorbed by the glass. What the metal does, the metal has a low emissivity, so any infrared radiation that it sees will get reflected back. And then it's basically insulating the phosphor plate from at the outer edges. I guess this is history. So it's basically insulating the outer edges here. And so with the center part getting hot and the outer edge cold, then you build up a thermal stress, cracking the faceplate. And so putting a shield over the center part, then that basically sees the same type of radiation as the outer part and would keep it, reduce the stress. I don't feel real comfortable in doing it that way, so I just want to go at 1.5 degrees C. That gives it time to equilibrate and come up at a more uniform temperature. And I know it worked during the processing of the frit, so I don't think that'll be a problem. The main difference between actually processing it is that it'll be under vacuum, and we'll just have to see with the very, very narrow edge on the funnel and the faceplate, whether it's really enough to give it the strength it needs. Normally on a CRT they make a wider flange there. It's probably almost 1/2 inch wide, whereas this is about 1/4 inch. So it's not the end of the project yet. I need to run the oven again to dry it out, make sure everything's ready, and then so that as soon as I seal the gun into it, I can process it. So I'll need to take some time to finish the list. And basically that's it. Yeah. I'm used to this.
Thank you.
I think it's an easy.
A lot of us use the phrase lollipop color with these sets. A lot of that lollipop color comes straight out of the camera. Chuck Ferris, well-known camera collector. Hoarder? Nah, I'm not sure. Is up next. Tell us all about the TK40 prototype in 1952. Those of you that don't know Chuck, he's been in broadcasting 47 years, now freelance and retired down in, where is it, Tennessee?
Yes.
Thank you. Has a private museum down there of his own. He's got a website that will, take you till the end of your natural years to read through the thing. But I'm looking forward to seeing this. Come on out, Chuck.
Okay, let's put it on this side. Lean towards it.
Turn this around. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, I've got my own pointer,
Okay, there's the clicker thingy.
and this should be forwards. Alrighty, I'm going to turn this a little bit this way so I can see the screen. First of all, I want to apologize for one thing. I've got an occasional cough. Unfortunately, I live in the allergy capital of the world, which is the Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee, and I've got an allergy cough. The good news is I only cough during presentations like this, when I'm talking and when I'm sleeping. My wife sent me an email this morning, says, can you please stay out of town a few more days? I've gotten the best night's sleep that I've had in years. And she says, if you come home early, you're going to sleep in the guest room. And I told her I can't because it's full of television cameras. And that's true. All right, we're going to talk about the early development of RCA tube electronic cameras. Back in the, after World War II, RCA began the development of experimental tube television cameras. There wasn't too many color television sets available in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Here you see some of the first known photographs of the RCA experimental cameras. And these things were absolutely huge. The engineers named these things the coffin cameras. Why? Because they said if they pass away, you can bury me in one of these cameras. And that's true, and that's stuck with the cameras for a long, long time. Here's another shot of them. You'll see how crude they are. Just some dichroics here. And look at these cooling fans on top. They didn't really care what these things looked like because nobody was going to see them. They were just experimental only. This was taken in 1950. This picture here was taken in 1949. All right, here in 1951, within 1 year, they had completely changed the look of these cameras. And I want you to notice these black turrets on these cameras because this will come into play in a little while. These cameras looked a little bit more like the camera that Steve's got over, the TK41 that he's got over in the museum. At the same time, 1951, CBS was developing a mechanical color television. And it's interesting because this is an RCA TK30 that they modified. And RCA was making their color camera and CBS was making theirs. So RCA was really moving forward knowing this, and they wanted to get their color cameras out as soon as possible. The FCC wanted a demonstration of them, and I think we all know by now that RCA did win that demonstration, and they were given approval, and I believe it was December of 1953 to make their color television system, and they did. So after these coffin cameras, the second generation of them with the black turrets, were built. The Colonial Theater, you'll notice RCA and NBC, they built 4 RCA TK40 prototype cameras. Notice these black turrets. I believe these black turrets were taken off of these 2 cameras right here. They got rid of the cameras, but why make new turrets? They kept the black turrets. They built 2 other cameras. Here's one here, and there's one back in the back here. Notice no vents in these cameras at all, except on the top. And this was a huge mistake made by RCA because these cameras got very hot. And later on, you'll see what they had to do to improve it. But I'm amazed that they did not put vents on these cameras. So here again, we're going to talk about these black turrets because you're going to see them again later. In 1952, RCA and NBC wanted to demonstrate that not only will these cameras work in the studio, they'll also work in the field. So this truck right here that you see was an iconoscope truck built in the 1930s. They stripped out the iconoscope cameras and they built a 2-camera color truck. Here is one of the Colonial Theater cameras that you saw earlier with those 4 cameras with the black turret. They took 2 of those cameras and they put them in this truck. Let's continue on. Here's the camera again, close up of it. And the demonstration was successful. The cameras did work outdoors. What have we here? This is my camera. I'll tell you the story in a second about how I acquired it. But you'll notice, black turret, no vents on the sides, and we're going to talk about some of the features on here, and we're going to try to figure out how old this camera is, and is this camera actually that camera? Here's another shot of it. What I have done, and this is just as a few weeks ago, I took all the panels off, took them down to an auto body shop. They computer matched the original RCA silver color, and everything was repainted for me. The turret, which is black and very rare, I have not painted. And there's a reason for that. We'll talk about it in a minute. Here's the other side of the camera. Ed Rutan saw this camera and said, "Oh my God, it's older than my camera." We all know who that is. This is Ed Rutan's camera. It was built sometime in the mid-1954, and it was owned by CBS. Until Ed saw my camera, he said his camera was the oldest known tube color camera in the United States. Notice it's got a silver turret, and this is the high voltage section of the camera. There's a vent right here. You go back to my camera, there is no vent. A lot was going on in 1954. So they learned right away that they better put a vent in the side of this door right here for high voltage, and they did. So here's that camera again with no vents. We're wondering, what in the world did Mr. Sarnoff do? Well, let's take a look. This is my camera when I got it. This camera originally came from a remote truck in New York City. It was used for many years, and then it was transferred to NBC in New York. Then it was transferred to NBC in Los Angeles. When they were done with it, they sent it to a small affiliate station. There actually was two of these. They sent, and both of them had black turrets. It was sent to a small NBC affiliate station in Novato, California, north of San Francisco. When they were done with it, they were both put on a loading dock, and they said anybody who wants them can have them. Unfortunately, all the support equipment was gone, and all that was left was the two cameras. One of the cameramen took this camera home, and another cameraman took the other one home. That camera's disappeared. We don't know where it is. He took this camera and decided to restore it. He started. He didn't do a very good job. When the camera was in Los Angeles, they painted it blue. And NBC in Burbank did a lot of cameras in blue. Some of their RCA TK30s were also painted blue. Notice the black turret. So he started to restore the camera and gave up due to health issues and pushed it underneath his mobile home. There it sat for probably 40 years. He fought cancer off and on most of his life and was finally told that he was going to pass away. Somebody told me about this camera. I was living in Los Angeles at the time and said, "Chuck, if you want a camera, this guy needs to get rid of it fast because he needs the money for his medical bills." I called him on the phone. He says, "Come up and get it." I grabbed my wife's SUV. I took off from Los Angeles, drove across the Golden Gate Bridge. He peeled back some metal underneath his trailer, and there was his camera. It was filled with mouse poop, black widow spiders, and a rat. It did not look like this. I took it down, and we took a garden hose, and we hosed it off and brushed it out before I dare put it in my wife's car. You'll notice the back of this camera, there is a filter wheel on the back of this camera. You do not see that on any of the later cameras, and I'll explain that in just a few minutes. This is a publication, this is a picture out of the RCA publication from 1953, and it shows the black turret. I do not believe any black turrets were made after that, and that's significant. And there it is on the black, on two cameras. There's two of these, by the way, in the truck. This is camera 2, and inside my camera, there are marks that say camera 2. RCA tried something and it didn't work. Back in the 1950s, early 1952, probably even 1953, they put a side focus handle on the side of the camera. My camera has holes in the side panel where a focus knob used to be. Here is an early manufacturing photograph of TK40s, and if you'll notice right here, there is a side focus handle. This did not last probably weeks. The cameraman tried to focus with that thing, and you've got a camera this big oops, excuse me. You've got a camera this big that weighs almost 400 pounds, and there's no way you could focus with a little tiny focus handle. So that thing did not last. But if we go back here, my camera had that focus handle at one time. Here is the inside of that panel showing that there 100% was a side focus handle on that camera. What they did is when that camera went out into the field, they took that focus handle off. In the chassis of the camera, you can see this very, very crudely cut hole. The TK41 series later, that was made in 1954, had a nice machine cut hole in here. My camera does not. And this is something that Ed Rutan saw. And he said, your camera is one of those early prototype cameras from 1952. What they did is they took out that side focus handle, and this is a crudely made handle, and you turned it, and it would focus the camera. You'll notice this similar handle that was on the 1954, 55, 56 TK41s. This one was just welded together and actually is barely holding itself together. So here you'll notice this camera, you can't see it, but in another photograph I have, there is the little holes here where side focus used to be. And here is that additional handle that was added. This is another photograph taken around 1953, and you can see the holes on the side where it was. I believe this is one of the other Colonial Theater cameras that had a silver turret, not the two black turrets. Now notice right here, there's some vent holes in the chassis, and here it is. This only happened in the very, very early cameras. Here is my camera under restoration, and you will notice here it's got those vent holes. Here's the other side. I only have one of these covers. I'm going to have to get another one made. There was a little screen cover that fit over those vent holes. This is a TK41 built in probably 1955. There is no vent holes in the chassis, so we know my camera's pretty early. Here is my camera in the TK40 prototype configuration with the side focus, with the vent holes and the black turret and no vents. Here it is. I believe my camera is this camera right here. And by the way, these numbers, this says camera 2 and mine says camera 2 inside. But Ed Rutan passed away. Stop the presses. New information has come out. For those that don't know Bobby Ellerby, he runs a website called Eyes of a Generation. He is probably one of the leading, I would say the leading experts in television camera history in the country. He spent his life researching where television cameras are, where they started, and how many were made. His website is really something to check out. There's thousands and thousands of pages there, and this is his TK41. Bobby took one look at my camera a few years ago and said, I believe your camera is this camera. This picture was taken in March of 1954 when, as is after the FCC approved the color television system that RCA made. They went into production in March of, I think it was March 17th, 1954, and they made this TK40. And not a prototype, this is the first batch of TK40s. And you'll notice they've got fins here, air vents in the side of the camera, but not in the high voltage hood. And there is right here, you can barely see where that focus handle was. Black turret too. Here is my same camera. When I got the camera, it had an RCA TK41 viewfinder on it. What happened when it went into Los Angeles, they took the old optics out, they put TK41 optics in it. Happened all the time with the cameras. Why throw the camera away when you've got new TK41 optics and a viewfinder that you can put on it? So they kept the body, changed the optics, kept the black turret, and they changed the viewfinder to a TK41 viewfinder, which was a much better viewfinder. So what I did is I put a TK41 viewfinder on here, and Bobby Ellerby says, this is the camera you should be restoring. He thinks it's this one. and there's mine. I put a little NBC logo on the side. I have not got the side logos on the camera yet because it was just repainted and I'm still restoring it. Here's a couple of more photographs from March, April, May of 1954 showing a few remotes, and you see the same camera here with no vents in the cover. These are the first remote trucks that NBC made. These were made in the end of 1953, and the 4 Colonial Theater cameras were put in these trucks. They were sent out on January 1st to cover the Rose Parade. You might have seen pictures of the cameras covering the Rose Parade. Well, it was these 2 trucks, and that's a utility truck there. Then the cameras went, the trucks went back. They took the Colonial cameras out, put them back in the studio, and they put these cameras from 1954, March of 1954, into those trucks, and there was 2 cameras in each truck. Notice the black turrets. Okay, it's interesting that the RCA CT100 television set came out within a week of the manufacture of those March 1954 cameras. So Mr. Sarnoff tried to get all this stuff done at the same time. He got the cameras out, and of course you've got to get the TV sets out. Now, here's something very significant. To use these cameras outdoors, they had to add some type of filtration system. So if you'll notice right here in the back, there's a little tiny filter wheel, and you don't see that on the studio cameras. Here is my camera, and there's the filter wheel. Here's another camera, and obviously, by the way, they put 2 of them on this side and 2 of them on this side. Why, I do not know. Maybe it was cameraman preference. One was left-handed, one was right-handed. This camera shows it on the right, along with my camera showing it on the right. And here we are looking at the camera again. Now, I love this picture of Ed, by the way. It was probably taken about 40 years ago. Ed swore to his death that my camera was that camera from the Colonial Theater. And there it is. Bobby Ellerby swears that my camera is the one from March 1954. What do I do? Because of the black turret and the vent holes, which did not show up in the RCA TK41s, and the focus holes in the back, and the black turret, do we know which one is which? We just don't know. Is it this one, or is it that one? We don't know. I believe it's this camera right here. And what I believe, this was built in 1952. I believe they took these black turrets from the original prototype cameras, the coffin cameras, and they moved them on and used them on these 2 cameras and then built 2 more. That's why this black turret still survives. My information was taken from the 1953 RCA Red Book. This is a great book if you can come across one to read. This is where RCA and NBC gave the information to the FCC on how great their system is, and it was approved. Also, Bobby Ellerby gave me a heck of a lot of information. The photographs came from mostly from his website, and I got the information off some NBC websites. And that's it. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Where did they shoot Matinee Theater? Was that
Matinee Theater?
NBC Burbank?
There you go. Somebody just answered it for me. NBC Burbank was Matinee Theater. Anybody else?
I just wonder why that camera, when you had it outside, when the picture outside, why it's not sinking into the grass?
I believe that the most of the pictures we saw, they were on dollies or something.
The one beside the truck, it's sitting on the grass.
Yeah, I don't know. Yes, sir.
What kind of filters were on that wheel?
Okay, I'm going to see if I can go back real quick here, and I'll show you. Excuse me. The question was what kind of filters are on the wheel? And I will go back and show you the configuration of that wheel since I still got a couple of minutes here. Here we go. This is the 4 filters right here that are inside the turret, and that is like an ND filter. And none of mine survived. One of them was actually laying in the bottom of the camera, and it was a gelatin filter like you'd see on a light. And they were different levels of ND. And so this rod right here was connected to that handle in the back, and when you rotated that, there was an assembly inside the camera that caused this ND filter to rotate in behind the lens.
They weren't color correcting filters? Yeah.
They were ND filters, period.
Did that camera have that kind of range to operate indoors under 3200 and outdoors?
Well, I know that the TK41s, that early TK41 that I have, doesn't have any of these filters in it. And I'm pretty sure when they got the camera outside, probably back in end of 1952, 1953, our video guy said, we can't iris the thing down far enough. We better do something. So they put this in.
Yeah. I'm thinking of its ability to handle the extreme color temperature difference.
Yeah, I do not know what they did to change that. Color temperatures for outside, unless they put screw-on filters in. I have not seen them. Yes, sir.
I have a feeling I read somewhere that they have put neutral density filters in the individual orthicon maps.
Yes, I have seen that. I've seen that in the black and white cameras and in the later color cameras. But I'm going by just my camera at the moment. This is all it's got. It's got the ND filters inside and no color correction on the outside. So I can imagine, I don't think they had range to turn those knobs to go indoors to outdoors. So somehow they probably, and I wasn't there, but somehow they probably had a way to correct the color temperature. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Impossible question. You showed those first cameras, they had the large aircraft landing light under them.
Yes.
Any idea how many watts those things were?
I know I don't know, but the lights that were put underneath the cameras, we call them eye lights. And I actually used them back in the 60s when I used early color television. And I don't think they were too bright. The question was, how many watts they were. I think all they did was fill in the nose shadows and fill in the lights under the eyes because they had to have so many hot lights up above. And the actors were complaining, and we even used them in early TV shows where they just shot up and they were sometimes gelled off or ND'd off to just fill in the shadows in the face. Yes, sir.
I assume there's no serial number or anything on this. Have you looked for any date codes on any of the parts?
There is nothing inside my camera at all that shows anything as to when it was made, as to any MI numbers, as to anything. When the guy decided to restore it, there's normally a plate right in this area right here. The only thing written inside this camera in 2 places is a 2. That's it.
But this is like we were saying the other day, that all of these cameras were works in progress.
Yes, they were.
And to say that this was fixed at some point, it never was true, even though in terms of the style.
Oh, sure. The question was about works in progress. Yeah, they came up, the 2 coffin cameras obviously were major works in progress, and you can see how they changed the big black coffin cameras. But once they came up with this design for the 4041, they pretty well kept this design, but the insides were upgraded constantly, and the 41s were manufactured all the way up in the late 1960s. Anybody else?
When you say restore, can you define that?
Okay, how do I plan to restore this camera? Yes.
Is that cosmetic or electronic?
Okay, I do not have all the electronics for this camera. I have come up with some of them. I probably have about 80% of the support equipment, and it took me about 20 years to find them. I got this camera back in the 90s. I am cosmetically restoring the outside of the camera. I am not restoring the turret. Now, since we don't know for sure if my camera was one of the 1952 Colonial Theater prototypes or one of the March 1954 first run of the RCA TK40s, I have both configurations. And when I'm displaying the camera, I can display it both ways. We're still trying to research it. The bad news is there's no markings inside. I'm going to personally stick with that it was a Colonial Theater camera and they added the filter wheel to it because we know they didn't have a filter wheel in the Colonial Theater. There was no reason to do it. Bobby Ellery believes that when they made that first batch on those 2 remote trucks, they built them with the filter wheel in so they could be used outside. And he could be right.
So is your goal to get it to work?
No, I don't have enough equipment to get it to work. I am working on it, but it would really be something. And if I did get it to work, I wouldn't have the original dichroic optics. I would have the upgraded TK41 optics and a working TK41 viewfinder. I do not have the viewfinder cover that you saw that didn't have anything on the side. I had that manufactured. So it did not come with the original TK40 prototype viewfinder. It came with a TK41 viewfinder, and that's what's on the camera at the moment. All I did was restore the shell because I believe it could have been one of those Colonial cameras, and that's what I wanted to display. But it'll never work. I don't think so, not in my lifetime. Okay, thank you. Vote for me.
How much do you know about the progress on the color camera here at the museum and the efforts to restore that?
I think Steve would probably be the best one to ask for that, but I know what he's doing. He's sending out each piece of bathtub rack equipment and having those individually restored by different people, instead of like me trying to restore an entire camera chain. And I am working on a TK41 right now, which is 100% complete. That used to be owned by ABC. But restoring each one of those parts, because most of that camera was in the rack, not in the camera. Right. The only thing inside that camera, beside the optics, was a horizontal and vertical board and a few other pieces of equipment and some cooling fans. All the internal equipment was all in a big rack. So it takes a long time. And Steve's slowly having each piece restored by somebody else.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Well, the old clock on the wall says that was our last presentation here. Or this sheet says it was the last presentation. First, I want to thank everybody that gave a presentation and thank all of you for hanging around. Mike Molnar, Benjamin Moore, Olin Schuler, James O'Neill, John Yurkon, Chuck Ferris. There's still one more to go, but it's a seminar that's going to be back at the museum on the auction stage. Chuck Azar is going to be running a little restoration and repair of tube-type TV sets presentation.
Can you ask who's not going to be here tomorrow? Can you ask who's not going to be here tomorrow?
Oh, who is not going to be here tomorrow? Can you raise your hand?
All day, you mean, or just part of it?
We're going to pass around. Is that the board nomination things?
This is the voting for the board.
Yeah.
Just put the bidder number on it.
Yeah, just put your bidder number on that, which we will keep secret, but at least we have an idea of who we've covered, so we don't vote twice. When we're done here, we can all adjourn back there so this can be reset for dinner. The silent auction will close at 6 o'clock.